In terms of some of the trends that we saw this year that were probably different from previous years, I would say that the evolution of the e-commerce market in general has been fascinating. So what we've seen is that the penetration rate for online sales remain at about 30%. So that was roughly the same as last year. And what we've seen is quite a significant slow in the proportion of sales that are going online. So we've reached, arguably a bit of an inflection point when it comes to the proportion of sales that are going online. And there's been a kind of a maturity point. You might argue there's been a maturity point within that online space. And actually, this Christmas, we saw similar levels of online penetration compared to last Christmas. So that could be a bit of a surprise for many retailers.
So when we compare peak 2024 with peak 2023, there are some differences, but on the whole, it's very consistent. So when we look at parcel volumes, week 48, which was the Monday, the 25th of November, the days leading up to Black Friday and then beyond into Cyber Monday, those were the biggest shopping days in terms of online orders and parcel volumes going through the networks. And we saw some of our retailers order volumes and parcels jump 50% or even more from one day to the next. So the days leading up to Black Friday and Cyber Monday being the biggest online shopping days is consistent with not only 2023, peak in 23, but actually it's been the same for the last 3-4 years. And that really just goes to show that shopper behavior is changing. The pattern of shopping is changing. So shoppers are bringing their spend forward. So they're buying their Christmas presents early to take advantage of the incentives and discounts and offers around Black Friday to save money, which is understandable when you think that households are still feeling the pressure of the cost of living crisis. And that's something which I don't think will change in 2025 either. So delivery performance across our GFS carrier partners was absolutely outstanding. So the biggest surges in parcel volumes and orders being shipped through networks coincided with when we were seeing lots of problems with things such as localized floods, strong winds, weather warnings across the country. But even despite that, carrier networks were able to recover with minimal disruption to service or delays, which showed just how resilient the networks were. But having said that, we know that it wasn't the same for all carriers. We are aware that there were some carriers that did struggle to deal with those challenges when they happened.
The desire for consumers to be able to choose where to and where from they want to send their parcels. And I think we all got used in COVID that everyone was at home and it was very, very easy to have deliveries arrive or collections. But now people are back at work. It looks like the demand is shifting a little bit more towards convenience. So definitely something to think of in retailers and brands checkouts, giving options and including locker deliveries.
So in terms of how retailers met their sales expectations this year, I think generally there's a bit of a tone of disappointment. And what we've seen with some of the latest data, for example, from the BRC, is that sales were up mildly on this time last year. So sales were up 0.4% in Q4 compared to the same quarter last year. And actually, if you take into account inflation, what it means is that volumes were down. There were some bright sparks in that. So in terms of category performance, we saw beauty sales perform relatively well. That was strong momentum that's been built up throughout the year. And actually gifting and beauty were one of the bright spots within the overall market. But of course, there are always winners and losers within the overall space. And what we saw is that Next performed really strongly, outperformed the market. So they saw sales rise by 6% in terms of group sales. Within that, what they saw is that online performed really well. partly at the expense of in-store sales, but actually they also saw international sales perform really strongly as well.
So there are two common pitfalls where we see delivery fail every peak, and that holds true across the 23 years that GFS have been in business. The first is where retailers fail to plan. So they go into peak without a clear plan or forecast of what they need, and one that hasn't been pre-agreed with their carrier or delivery partners. They're the ones that when those peaks come, those order volumes spike, they find that they're struggling to get the additional capacity that they need to get the orders out the door and delivered to those customers who are waiting for them. The second are those retailers that rely on one or two carriers that don't have a diversified carrier strategy, which means that if service isn't up to scratch with either of those carriers, then they're going to struggle with protecting delivery performance and having a contingency when they need it most.
I think, though, it's really important to consider that the overall market remains quite challenging through that period. The cost of living pressures remained, and so although inflation has fallen back to target around 2.5%, what we've seen is an increase in the price level. So households still remain constrained. And actually, if you look at the last time inflation was around 2%, which was around 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, what we've seen is an average basket of goods and services 20% higher than it was 3 years ago. So when you look at after households have paid for all of their essentials, after they've paid for food, energy, mortgage costs, how much spare cash do they have at the end of the month? Actually, it's only the top 20% most wealthy households that have seen a rise in their spare cash in terms of their spending power compared to 5 years ago. So there's kind of a big challenge on the least affluent households there.
TikTok continues to grow and move from strength to strength, with TikTok Shop holding super brand days with the likes of L'Oreal. Sellers like Made by Mitchell and P. Louise have had £1 million days, like sales on a single TikTok live, in the £1 million or $1 million range. And this is something that is alien to most retailers used to selling on their own website and marketplaces, but is definitely an opportunity that if you get to grips with, shouldn't be missed.
I think one of the notable surprises this year is that while spending across retail has been under pressure, actually some consumers have ring-fenced spending elsewhere. So actually hospitality and leisure seems to have held up relatively well, and actually in particular holiday spending as well. So post-pandemic, a trend that we have seen continue and almost become permanent is that consumers are ring-fencing their spending around holidays, and that's been an area that's continued to perform well. But actually, if you look at footfall data, for example, from MRI, then what we've seen is that while footfall might have been down year on year across traditional retail channels, it was actually more defensible in retail parks, in leisure parks, and actually the nighttime economy seems to have performed relatively well compared to the retail part. So overall, when you consider all of these different disruptive forces, what we've seen is that Christmas has been much more of an omni-channel Christmas. There's much more fragmentation across different channels, fragmentation across online and offline, and actually those retailers that seem to have performed well are those retailers that have leaned into that omni-channel strategy. I think the other important consideration as well is just that ongoing impact of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And so what we saw again this year is that traditional build up of Christmas sales has changed. It's turned into a kind of a two-peak Christmas where consumers expect Black Friday and they've pulled forward a lot of their gifting purchases into Black Friday and Cyber Monday at the expense of traditional Christmas sales later in the year.
So in our experience, there are 3 key principles for delivery success over peak. The first is take the learnings and apply them. So if you're not already doing your peak wash up in January to understand what went well, what didn't well, what changes need to be made to avert those things from happening again next year, or this year, I should say, then you're already on the back foot. So first is review and analysis, your peak wash up. Second is build your plan, your forecast, what you're going to need, taking the inputs around what campaigns are going to be running, what the sales forecasts are. Build your capacity plan around that, and more importantly, make sure that you submit it in a timely way to your carrier partners. In most cases, the deadlines for getting your plans in for peak are around the end of September. After that, the carriers have locked in capacity, and you're limited after that to be able to get more capacity if you need it. So the third principle, and probably the most important principle, is about having a multi-carrier strategy, which means that as a retailer, you've got the operational flexibility and above all the contingency when you need it most to protect delivery. Now, we've just completed a post-peak survey across UK retailers, both those that work with a multi-carrier partner such as GFS and those that don't. And the difference between delivery performance and expectations between the two is absolutely startling. So that just goes to prove my point.
The other trend that we've seen is the launch of so many retailer-led marketplaces. The biggest two in the UK are probably B&Q and Debenhams. Tesco's have launched their marketplace now, and that's obviously going to be massive. But there are many, many more, from the likes of Superdrug to you name it. Just about every retailer is opening a marketplace. And they are attracting a different pool of customers to those that you'd find on the kind of traditional eBay, Amazon marketplaces. So a point to note is to check out the ranges. There'll be new marketplaces like Zooplus are about to launch a marketplace. There'll be many, many more retailer-led marketplaces. So choose the ones that have a good fit for your inventory.
I think the key takeaways for me looking into next peak season is around preparation, and so retailers continue to prepare for the biggest time of the year, being the final quarter of the year, but also just expecting there to be volatility throughout the year. So there's still question marks over the strength of the economy, where interest rates might be by the end of the year, what's going to happen to inflation, lots of geopolitical volatility as well. So just being prepared for what that might mean in the build-up and preparations for Christmas.
The Chinese marketplace, they are making big moves in the UK. We're all familiar with Temu from their advertising of Shop Like a Billionaire, and the fact that they have been shipping effectively low cost, low average sale price goods into the UK direct from China. But they've been recruiting like mad and are starting to attract online retailers based in the UK to sell to the UK. And if you've not already looked at Temu, I think it's an opportunity that can't be missed, because this is only going to grow. They've put a huge investment in, and obviously got desires to grow, to be the next eBay or the next Amazon. I think it'll be some time before large brands choose to sell on Temu, but for smaller independent retailers and for online sellers who have a wide range of inventory, it's going to be a very exciting proposition in 2025.
So we know that customer expectations continue to be higher than ever, their expectations being higher than ever. And so whether this is around delivery, and so consumers just wanting multiple delivery options to tailor their preferences depending on the type of product it is, the price point of the product, but just having all of those different delivery options, and also return options as well. So making that customer journey as frictionless as possible for consumers is again a key part of the preparation and learning for going into next peak season. Businesses need to remain flexible and adaptable to the challenges that are thrown at them. So making sure that they almost embrace the kind of volatility that's thrown at them, and thinking about creating this adaptive commerce model that can cater for all of this volatility that is now almost kind of second nature in terms of what retailers have to learn to deal with. So being able to meet those customer expectations in a more volatile way just by building adaptability into their businesses.